Everyone, and welcome to this ECB Focus session. Today's topic is on advancing the target services with the DLT transactions in central bank money. My name is Aileen, and I'm here with the fantastic team of ECB colleagues, and we will try to guide you through today's event. It's going to be one of those speedy, typical focus sessions events where we will be doing lots in the next hour and a half. So, stay tuned and stick with us. So before we get going, I just want to go into a few little tips before the event starts. So if we move to the next slides, there's a few... there's a few little highlights before we fly into it. As you know, we always live stream and record all our sessions. So if you're at any point in time today are facing any issues, I would encourage you to move to the live stream. The easiest way to do that is by scanning the QR code that you see on the screen now. So you can just either scan it with your smartphone and then you have that one open, or you can use the link, the YouTube link on the screen now. So these are the two options. So have that one ready in case you have any issues. All right, so then before we move in, there's a few more practical things that we want to get you up to speed on. If we move back just one slide, I actually want to engage you a little bit because we will be asking questions today also with a QR code. So again, if you grab your phones and then scan the QR code on the screen now. So I know that this is, really not what I want you to do, to have your phone right next to you, but it works really well for a way for us to communicate with you. So if you scan the QR code on the screen now, it will take you to a tiny little questionnaire. It's just like 3 quick questions where you can just click and move on. And these are just a warm-up to get everyone up on the page here before it will be us presenting to you. So just a little bit of warm-up for you guys as well. So scan the QR code and just answer those questions. And that will also give you a little bit of a hint about how we want to do the rest of the session. So this will be the way that you will also be communicating with us throughout today's speed session. So take the opportunity now and then just scan this QR code. And then if we move to the next slide, you will be seeing that this is also the way. It's a different link, but it's also a QR code that you can scan, have it open in a browser, and here you can submit questions throughout the event today. So this is the way for you to be able to interact with us. And as you all know, especially many of you have joined our sessions before, but I'm also happy to see that we have a lot of new colleagues. So this is the way for you to ask questions to us. And what we try to do with these sessions is always to try to pick up as many questions as possible. So really submit your questions throughout the event today via the QR code. If you, for some reason, do not want to submit questions here, you can also do it via email. So the email is displayed on the screen now. So it's mip.event@ecb.europa.eu. So you can also use this email address to post your questions. You cannot speak. We have a lot of people in the event today, as always. So we cannot, for the quality of the event, let people speak. So everyone is muted. You can raise your hand, but it's the same. So we'll just be pulling down those hands because we will have a lot of people in here today. So that's going to ensure that the quality remains good for today's event. So that was a little bit on the practical information. And before we then dive into it, I just want to give you a sneak peek here if you didn't already prepare for today's event. So it's a really super interesting program today. So lots of good sessions coming up in a minute. You can see them here. Take a shot of that so you have it and can get ready. But it's going to be intense. So, tighten up your seatbelts because there's a big ride ahead of us. And then, as I said, the ones who connected via the webinar, We noticed that many of you have joined our sessions before, but there was also a lot of newcomers, and we're really happy with this. So I want to encourage you to follow us, because this is actually the easiest way to stay up to date about what we do and the latest news. So do it in one of these channels. We're on X, we have a LinkedIn group, and you can also subscribe to a newsletter, again, via QR code. So a lot of QR codes today. But these are great ways to stay up to date about the latest news of market infrastructure and payments at the ECB. So that's it on my side. So without any further delay, I want to bring in our first speaker. I'm really delighted to have Dimitri Pattyn with us today. He's Deputy Director General at the ECB, and he will be doing the opening remarks. So Dimitri, I want to bring you in. Welcome on board.
Good morning, Ellen, and good morning, all. Do you hear me well? And
I
see
hear
me
you
well
perfectly.
as well? Okay, good.
Yes, thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this focus session. During our last focus sessions, we covered a wide range of topics of relevance for the target services. And if you allow, before moving to the topic of the day, I would like to come back briefly to ECMS, so the Eurosystem Collateral Management System. End of March, for those who were in the focus session, we debriefed you on the last, we gave you the last updates on ECMS before the go live on the 16th of June. And today I'm delighted to share with you that the launch was successful. So the migration weekend was very smooth. All the pre-agreed milestones have been reached on time. And of course, more important is how things play out the first days and weeks in production. And here again, it was very smooth. We had a limited number of incidents. Most of them had to do with specific configuration items which were not perfectly set up. All of them could be solved quickly, and none of them actually had an impact on the overall service delivery. So we are very happy of that, of course, because this is also marking the end of the Vision 2020 program. To recall briefly again, Vision 2020 was first the delivery of TIPS, so the instant payment system, back in 2018. Then we had the consolidation between T2 and T2S, and also the introduction of a new central liquidity management module that was in March 2023. And now with the launch of ECMS, we are delivering the third element of what we call the magic triangle between cash, securities, and collateral. So this is for the news. We are really happy that this turned out positively 1 month ago. But let me now focus on today's discussion. And before the topic itself, as Ellen mentioned, we are used to have a large attendance in our focus sessions, but I believe this one will break all records, because the backstage team told me today that we have more than 900 people registered for the session, coming from 46 countries. I believe this is really a record. And there will be also many more following from the live stream on our website. So no pressure for the presenters today. And today, actually, we want to share with you some insights on the latest decisions by the Governing Council of the ECB on our plans for settling DLT-based wholesale financial transactions using central bank money. As you know, providing those means for these types of transactions is a core function for the central banks. And currently we offer settlement of wholesale transactions in T2, which together with the other target services supports the free flow of cash, securities, and collateral across Europe in a safe and efficient manner. This is the magic triangle I was just mentioning a minute ago. Still, the target services continue to adapt to meet the evolving needs of the markets, always bearing in mind our goal to support, one, a single financial market in Europe, and then two, wider EU policy objectives such as the strategic EU autonomy, financial integration, but also the international role of the euro. As most of you know, last year, so between May and November 2024, we have conducted extensive exploratory work on how interoperability between T2 and market DLTs could be designed for the purpose of enabling DLT-based transactions to settle with central bank money. And Paul will tell us more about that later today. With the conclusions reached after this exploratory work, the Governing Council confirmed the need to move forward towards a concrete implementation roadmap. And the Governing Council has hence established a strategy covering both short and long term. This is the so-called two tracks approach that we have now in place. And for once, we have been quite creative in terms of branding. The first track is called Pontes. Pontes means bridges in Latin. And with Pontes, we want to build bridges between eligible market DLTs and the target services by means of implementing the necessary interoperability. And for that, so for the short term, we'll proceed in two steps. The first one will be a pilot phase that we aim at delivering in Q3 next year. And to keep the time to market short, we will also, in this context, leverage as much as possible on the features and solutions that were used during the exploratory work of last year. In a second step, still for the short term, we will implement enhancements to deepen the integration with the target services, and that will include operational, legal elements, but also technical standards. For the longer term, we have the second track. It is called Appia. Appia is also inherited from ancient Rome, as most of you know, and it naturally includes the international dimension of our work. And with Appia, we will continue to actively analyze DLT-based solutions with a focus on more integrated ecosystem in Europe. This will obviously be done in a close collaboration with public and private stakeholders. And the known pitfalls to be avoided are the lack of harmonization, we should prevent that, and the risk of an increased fragmentation. If we do not manage, there will be increased friction costs for both the issuers and the investors. So now coming to the menu for today, we will start with Paul Gardin. Paul will present the result of the exploratory work done during the second half of last year. And to recall, we tested 3 distinct setups together with more than 60 participants, and we had over 50 trials in production and experiments in test. For the second part of the focus session, we will have George Kalogeropoulos. George will cover the short-term implementation for the project Pontes. He will share some insights also on the roadmap and how we plan to involve interested stakeholders. So what will be the governance in place for this project? And last but not least, we will have Holger Neuhaus, who will cover the part on Appia. He will explain how we want to engage in the longer term. This will not directly be an IT delivery project, but one of our goals will be to organize a smooth articulation and a continuum between the conceptual long-term vision, but also ensure that there is a translation into tangible work products like we do now for Pontes. And to conclude on my side this introduction, it's time for me to wish you a fruitful session today. Do not hesitate to ask questions, as Eileen explained. For us, the value of the focus session increases when there are more questions. And this gives us also the opportunity to adapt our speech and to make sure that our interventions are matching the expectation. On my side, I will be listening in the background, and I will come back for a few closing words at the end of the session. And I think, Eileen, you mentioned it already, this event will be recorded, and the slides will, as always, be available on the ECB website after the event. And now back to you, Eileen, for a good focus session. Thank you.
Thank you, Dimitri. Delighted to have you on board as always. And as you just saw, you can start submitting questions. If we will get questions for Dimitri, he will be there and we can bring him back later on. So just, get going on your question side. But as Dimitri just highlighted, this is the program for today's event. Again, we're getting a lot of people already connected in the webinar. So I want to again encourage the ones of you to move to the live stream. Remember the live stream you see, you experience exactly the same. It's working perfectly. So you can move to the live stream at any point in time if you are experiencing any delays, because of course, the more people we have in the webinar, the slower it sometimes gets. But that's it for now. So thank you, Dimitri. And over to our first speaker. So I want to invite Paul. Paul is going to be our first speaker, and he's going to talk to us about the findings from the exploratory work. So Paul, over to you. Welcome.
Thank you, Helen, and good morning, everyone. Also from my side, welcome to this focus session. Can you hear me well? Excellent. So indeed, as Dimitri mentioned, and also Ellen alluded to, so I will walk you through the key figures and the key takeaways from the Eurosystem exploratory work that was conducted last year, bearing in mind that the ECB recently published its detailed report available on this website for a deeper dive and more detailed information. But if we starting with recapping what exploratory work was about, so as Dimitri mentioned, exploratory work was a public-private partnership conducted with market stakeholders and the Eurosystem between May and November 2024 last year. It focused on testing what the Eurosystem calls interoperability solutions. So these correspond conceptually to solutions where central bank money and DLT assets would sit on distinct DLT infrastructure, with a focus then on establishing the necessary interoperability between these infrastructures for safe settlement of these assets in central bank money. So these solutions were made available to the market to test the use cases and the business cases that they they brought forward and they wanted to explore with the Eurosystem in two modes, so to speak. So either to explore these test cases in experiments where the use case was tested in mock settings and test environments, or in trials where actual settlement took place within a specific and limited framework, with settlement in central bank money taking place in our target services. As Dimitri mentioned, the Eurosystem for this exercise provided three solutions that you see here on the right-hand side of the slide, developed by national central banks of the Eurosystem and made available for the trials and the experiments. So this included the trigger solution of the Deutsche Bundesbank, the TIPS hashlink solution of Banca d'Italia, and the full DLT interoperability of Banque de France. So you will see here in the slide that the relevant links are made available if you want to know more about the solutions. First in the general annex to the report, there's an overview of the three solutions, and then each national central bank has provided extensive documentation for trials and experiments on how their solution works. So these links are available for your reference. The three solutions, as I said, conceptually all represented different instances of an interoperability approach. They varied among themselves in terms of the exact technology used, in terms of the form, in the form of central bank money, and also how exactly, from a technical perspective, interoperability is established for the purpose of settlement. So I would also here refer you to this detailed documentation for more information on these solutions. If we then go to the next slides, over the key figures from exploratory work, you will see first on the left-hand side that the market interest for this exercise was extremely high. So we had overall 64 stakeholders coming from 9 different countries that took part in the experiments and the trials. And this made the exploratory work the largest initiative of its kind across the world at the moment. But in addition to this geographical diversity and the stakeholders coming from different jurisdictions, there was also a lot of diversity because market stakeholders, as you can see here, came from different parts of the value chain, different parts of payments and capital markets. So you can see here, for instance, commercial banks, CSDs, also pilot regime platforms took part in the exercise. So this really contributed to the success of the initiative, and in particular to the diversity of the use cases that that we saw. Because as you can see then in the middle of the slide, we overall had more than 50 trials and experiments that were conducted, with many use cases, not only on the security side, but also on the payments side. And these use cases tested realistic business scenarios and events across the value chain of wholesale markets, not limited to the settlement part. So this is something I will also come back to in a few minutes. I would also like to maybe underline how this exploratory work revealed the dynamic and innovative ecosystem in Europe. You can see this, for instance, with the many high-level digital bond issuances that took place in Europe at the occasion of the trials, and also by the high number of transactions that were settled as part of trials, with over 1.6 billion euros settled. In parallel to all this activity and the exploratory work, the Eurosystem also set up a dedicated market engagement strategy in parallel via a dedicated market contact group, but also setting up over 40 bilateral and multilateral meetings with key market stakeholders. And this really enabled the Eurosystem to gain key feedback in addition to the direct findings from the trials and the experiments. So I would also like to take this opportunity then to thank all the participants to exploratory work, but also all the market stakeholders that engaged with the Eurosystem at the occasion for their input and their engagement. If we now have a more detailed look at the use cases, so you can see on the slides the 50 plus use cases I have mentioned, and you can see that they were very diverse, exploring very different scenarios that lead to settling large value wholesale payments in central bank money. If we start with the trials, so the real transactions that took place that appear in blue on the slides, you can see that they were focused on the settlement in central bank money of DLT assets, in particular, the issuance of securities on DLT. This was in line with our expectation, and the eligibility criteria that we set out for the trials. But notably, market stakeholders beyond the issuance process also were keen to explore additional parts of the value chain beyond issuance and also secondary market activity. So this included, for instance, in trials, exploring the lifecycle management of securities, the redemption process, also repo transactions and fund subscription that were put forward and tested by the market in the trials. If we have a look at the experiments then that appear in green on the slide, you can see here an even wider range of use cases, including the security side, similarly to the trials, but also exploring payments use cases. And if we focus on those use cases for a minute, you will see that this included both domestic payments in the context of Europe, but also international cross-border payments beyond Europe with other currency areas. So domestically, the types of use cases tested including, for instance, the management of smart contracts, derivative products that automated all related payments in central bank money, also the automation of margin calls, managing and recording interbank claims, and then settling the resulting net claim in central bank money, and as well as facilitating the transfer of commercial bank money deposit tokens across DLT platforms. And on the international side, which you see at the bottom of this slide, so the Eurosystem tested how to settle payment versus payment transactions jointly with other central banks. And this was in particular done through Project Meridian FX in partnership with the BIS Innovation Hub. Thanks to all the participants to exploratory work, the Eurosystem was able to compile a very detailed overview of each of the more than 50 use cases. So if we have sufficiently piqued your curiosity with this slide, I would invite you to have a look at this comprehensive overview for more details. But I can already flag a key takeaway from the Eurosystem perspective of this very diverse and range of use cases, which is that this shows that the interest from the market to apply these new technologies in DLT extends beyond the settlement process, but across the value chain. So market stakeholders were keen indeed to link, for instance, different processes, different types of operations, such as the payment of a bond coupon, but also interbank reconciliations, as we've seen, or managing derivative products, to link that directly with the settlement in central bank money in an automated way, using DLT features and aspects of the new technologies, including so-called smart contracts. So beyond these key takeaways, I will now take a few minutes to highlight how the findings from exploratory work have informed the Eurosystem's decision to pursue, as Dimitri explained, a two-track approach with Pontes and Appia. So starting with Pontes, the first point to flag, of course, is as I said, the very high interest from the market in exploratory work. So highlighting a very strong market demand to explore DLT. Beyond that, and in particular, as we can see from the very high number of trials, which required from the market side investments in the necessary legal, operational, and technical work under a very tight 6-month period. So the fact that many stakeholders managed to do that and to conduct trials in the 6-month window shows how active and innovative the ecosystem in Europe is. And it also shows that many in the market are keen to look into the implementation of these new technologies in production beyond only exploration. The second key takeaway is that, and this was a point that was repeated from all market stakeholders, including beyond those that directly participate in exploratory work. This relates to the importance of providing central bank money for these DLT wholesale transactions, as central bank money is the only risk-free settlement asset available. So many market stakeholders have flagged that without central bank money available, they pointed to the difficulties in scaling their solutions and overall difficulties for the ecosystem in Europe to further grow and maintain its momentum. So the market emphasized the importance for the Eurosystem solutions that were made available in the 6-month trial window to continue being available on a more permanent basis. On that note, the Eurosystem also organized earlier this year a market-wide workshop to discuss the findings from exploratory work with its contact group and the participants to exploratory work. And at this occasion, the market also emphasized the importance of having a short time to market for a central bank money settlement solution for DLT transactions, as well as providing a single offering moving forward instead of a multiplicity of solutions on the Eurosystem side. So you will see that these considerations were key for the Eurosystem's decision to launch this Pontes initiative, and my colleague George will explain that in more details shortly. If we come to the next slides on Appia, you will also see that in addition to these key takeaways that I've just mentioned that were more short-term considerations, there was also important feedback from exploratory work related to the medium and to the long term. The first point that I've already emphasized, in particular from the use case side, is you've seen that the use of new technologies is being explored in a way that can potentially redesign the ways payments and capital markets work today. So this is in particular evidenced by the diverse set of use cases, the fact that many use cases explored aspects beyond only the settlement layer, that many of these use cases investigated, for instance, how to link, as I mentioned, processes and activities which today are outside the scope of current financial market infrastructures. So as a corollary of this very wide impact, this means also that the distribution of roles within this new ecosystem could differ from how these markets operate today, and in particular that services and functions that today are spread across stakeholders and across infrastructures could potentially be merged. Of course, this is a very wide-ranging consideration and would require more analysis from a business policy, legal, and regulatory perspective. So this is a medium to long-term consideration. A second point that Dimitri already alluded to, and that also market stakeholders flagged, is that these changes to the ecosystem and to the way payments and capital markets work, potentially with implementing these technologies, they have the potential to address today's shortcomings. So it is very well documented that there remains a significant degree of fragmentation in European financial markets today. And so as these new technologies and DLT could redesign the way the markets operate, there is an opportunity then to ensure that this new ecosystem is much more integrated and harmonized, and in particular to include these considerations from the onset. So that is a point that Dimitri has already flagged in the introduction, and you've heard, but that is important to flag, is that of course this increased harmonization and integration requires a lot of efforts, but in particular, it requires that the efforts towards harmonization start as the technology is being implemented, rather than only once it has been implemented, possibly in different ways across markets and jurisdictions. So this last point is, of course, key for the Eurosystem's decision to launch the Appia initiative, and in particular to progress on these aspects in parallel to the short term. It is key in the context of Europe, but it also applies more broadly if you consider that the investigation and adoption of DLT is also accelerating worldwide, and that there are current efforts to facilitate cross-border payments. So as Dimitri mentioned, including the international dimension in this Appia initiative as the Eurosystem progresses and the market also progresses towards implementation of these new technologies, coordinating with other jurisdictions is also very important. So I will just conclude on my side to flag that, of course, these considerations are wide-ranging. They require to take from the start a medium and long-term perspective in parallel to progressing on the short term. So this is why the Eurosystem launched this Appia initiative in parallel to Pontes, and Holger Neuhaus will detail further Appia further in this session. So that's it from my side. Thank you very much for your attention, and back to you, Ellen.
Oops, Paul, I disappeared there for a second. Let me bring you back on. Thank you so much, Paul. Excellent for the good presentation. So just for everyone to know, this report is published, right, Paul? We have it on the website, so everyone can go and read into all the details. We are getting a few questions on this. First, there was a simple question. I think you already mentioned this already, Paul, but maybe you want to stress it one more time. People are asking about the trials and experiments. Can you just in one word say what have been the difference between trials and experiments in this work, please?
Yes, of course. So with trials, the use cases that the market put forward and proposed to explore with the Eurosystem were tested in real settings. So this means that the Eurosystem provided an ad hoc limited framework for having real transactions settled with actual central bank money settlement taking place in T2 for all three solutions. And in experiments, the same use cases that the market brought forward were tested in mock settings. So in short, trials involved real money moving, and that meant, of course, more work from a legal, operational, and technical perspective. It also meant that the business cases that were tested in trials were realistic because these were actual transactions and actual services being exchanged in the market.
Excellent, thank you. Then there's also a few questions about, but maybe we will come to that, but I will give you an opportunity here as well. So are there implications on Pontes and Appia for the target services? That maybe because people can't wait for the next few presentations, but you want to give a little bit of a heads up on that?
Yes, yes, absolutely. Thanks. No, that's a very good question, and I know indeed my colleagues will explain that in just a second. I would just maybe like to emphasize, to answer this question, the importance of differentiating between the short term on the one hand and the medium and long term on the other hand. So for the short term, as we saw in the trials and exploratory work, we are talking about the interoperability solution. So this implies making a link actually between target services and these DLT platforms. So that's something that George will explain exactly how this will be established. But so of course that means we will rely on our target services also from that perspective. For the medium to long term, I have alluded to, let's say, wide-ranging implications also for the scope of DLT, for the fact that many of the processes that the market in the end wants to implement with these new technologies extends beyond what our current financial markets infrastructures can provide in the market globally, not just, of course, the Eurosystem's infrastructures, but that requires a lot more analysis. So that's why under the Appia initiative, this is something that Holger will explain further, but this is a more medium to long-term consideration.
Thank you, Paul. Then we also have people asking about if the Eurosystem will conduct further exploratory work on other implementation approaches, for instance, distribution or integration. So basically continuing the work that you just explained here.
Yeah, so I would suggest to maybe revisit this question after the presentation by Holger, in particular on the Appia initiative. So the short answer is that as part of this Appia initiative, we will look into practical work. So that may include exploring, for instance, how to set up a shared platform or explore these integration distribution approaches conceptually. But as Holger will explain, the focus will be much more targeted in nature than the exploratory work.
Thank you, Paul. And I will almost let you go. There's just one last, there's been a few questions on this. So on the wholesale CBDC, so central bank digital currency, what they issued in the exploratory work, can you say a little bit about that?
Yes, of course. So indeed, as I mentioned, we relied on an ad hoc framework for the trials, and settlement took place in target services. So that meant that in particular for the full DLT interoperability solution, the central bank money settlement actually took place in T2, and the Eurosystem issued cash tokens that were exploratory in nature, with real central bank money staying in the RTGS. I just want to flag that this was not let's say a conceptual design choice on the part of the Eurosystem, but rather a constraint of the limited and tight 6 months time window. So for that purpose, we relied on the existing legal and operational framework we have in our target services, instead of establishing a bespoke framework only for a 6 months period. But George will, I'm sure, explain that in further details in the next part of the session.
Excellent. Thank you, Paul. All right, I will let you go. We have people already asking about the next session. So I think we will move on to the next track there. I know you guys are very keen on this. It's also a super interesting project coming along. So, bear with us. We will touch all points here today. So thank you to Paul for now. Paul will be staying. So in case there will be more questions for him, we can bring him back online. But now I want to bring on our next speaker, which is George, and George is going to talk to us about the short-term track, Pontes. So George, over to you. Thank you.
Hi, Elaine. Good morning to you. Good morning to all. I see a lot of questions and a lot of, I would say, passes from Paul also this presentation. I'll try to do my best. And also I will try to address perhaps some of the questions during the presentation. If we perhaps move on the starting point, I want to recap a bit on the why. Let's not forget, as Dimitri mentioned, this is a project. It's a Eurosystem new project, and it's always good to recap why we do it. I think Dimitri alluded to most of the elements. Perhaps the most important one, the starting point, it's a strategic policy, I would say, of the ECB, but also the European authorities to support market innovation and the expressed market need. Innovation in itself, I would say, if you allow me, is not an end in itself, but it's a means to keep the financial market in Europe relevant and attractive. It's very important, while we do so from the ECB side, that we keep also relevant what we call the pivotal role of central bank money. Apologies for all the acronyms. I think they are well described in the presentation, but we love acronyms in the Eurosystem. So central bank money, it's an important integral part of financial market transactions. Some people call it the risk-free settlement asset. Basically, you use money on the balance sheet of the central banks, and as such, a whole, I would say, scope of the risks are eliminated. Of course, because there were some questions also in the chat, there is also in parallel complementary the commercial bank money activity, which is should remain and will remain in the project in the two-tier financial market, let's say, structure. The third element, which is important, and it should not be surprising, is, of course, the Eurosystem and the ECB relevance in all this innovation. And when we say relevance, again, the perspective we take is that from a monetary policy and I would say interest rate mechanism perspective, our role, the central bank mining role, should and could remain and be important for signaling the, let's say, economic messages and monetary policy messages to the market. Finally, all these elements is not surprising, and it's actually part of, I would say, the status of the ECB is to support the wider policies in the European Union, and you are all familiar with the even more acronyms here, the CMU, the Capital Markets Union in the past, but also moving more towards the Trade and Investment Union. And not surprising in the current, I would say, challenging global geopolitical framework to maintain the international role of the euro. So I just want to recap this because there is an urgency and a clear mandate from the ECB Governing Council to move timely with the Pontes project, or what used to be called Track 1. And this leads us nicely to the next slide, I think, where it will give us a bit of more perspective on the timeline. Not sure who is pushing the slides, Celine. It takes a bit of time, I know. Okay, excellent, thank you. So indeed, we are now in, let's say, beginning of Q3, moving towards beginning of Q3, and we have a clear decision of the Governing Council to move on with the Pontes pilot phase. And here, what we are doing at the moment is we are fine-tuning user requirements, but we are already in parallel working with the development for going into production. Paul very nicely explained the trials and experiments. And now there is a clear, I would say, policy strategic decision to move forward to the next phase, which we hope to start by Q3 2026 and go into production with what we call a pilot phase. In a few minutes, you realize why we call it a pilot phase. There are certain limitations at the moment, but this is, I would say, a good balancing act between waiting for years or months to get it right and having a short time to market to eliminate, let's say, the risks of making the European market not relevant. What we are going to see in the coming months, basically between now and the go live of the pilot by Q3 26, as I said, is a specification of the requirements, and we'll come back to how we want to interact with you further beyond these focus sessions, but also acceptance testing, what we call acceptance testing within the Eurosystem, but also probably what is very important for most of you, user testing with the communities in Europe. And what you see perhaps as a innovation here around the milestone of the technical go live, there will be user testing before and after. We can have a long discussions on this agile approach, but the key message here is that we want to be, let's say, shorten the time to go live and facilitate most of you who are interested to go into production very soon. There are two important swim lanes in this slide, in addition to the pilot phase of the Pontes. I will start perhaps with the yellowish or orangey one on the top. In between, there is a possibility, subject to reaching out to the relevant national central banks, especially those who, let's say, operated the three solutions during the trials and experiment. Paul mentioned Banque de France, Pontes and Banca d'Italia, to continue, if needed, some trials and experiments between now and the pilot go live. this is a optionality. We're not going to be very transparent. We're not going to focus a lot into this activity, but it's something which could be possible subject to availability of the three national central banks and further discussion with the Eurosystem. Now, the other important, let's call it more medium-term perspective in this slide is certain enhancements on which I'm going to speak in a few minutes that we will need to consider subject to governing council discussion, of course, and move forward beyond the pilot phase. Here, we are still into, I would say, the exploratory phase. We try to build concrete user requirements, and we need to understand what would it take to take the pilot phase, let's call it, to the next operational phase. Some people call it a production grade system offered by the Eurosystem. Again, this is a kind of appetizer for the moment, but it's an important work that goes on in parallel. Moving to the next slide, which is, I think, comes nicely, and I mentioned it to some extent, here it's the interaction, the need for a structured interaction between the Eurosystem and the relevant stakeholders. Again, moving into a project organization, it will not be surprising to most of you that we want to interact with internal and external stakeholders, again, as I said, in a structured way. And we are looking at it in similar way to what we've done with target services in the past. So there will be a Pontes working group focusing, I would say, in the internal kitchen, if I can use the term, and it will include the ECB and the national central banks, which basically are part of the central bank money liquidity provision. And there will be also another working group, contact group, the Pontes contact group. And I think this is probably what is of interest to this session today. There is a call of interest, expression of interest that you are going to see on the website of the ECB shortly, could be today or tomorrow. And the idea here is to, similar to what happened to some extent to the exploratory phase last year, to engage with the market in defining, assessing, establishing user requirements for the production, I would say, great service of the Eurosystem to the market. We will rely a lot on this group. I think some of you have experience in the past with that, and also it's not surprising we use it for other interactions. Is it like the AMISECO group for the target services, or the other market contact groups for the monetary policy activities of the Eurosystem. The deadline for submitting applications to this group is the 29th of August. I'm sure, I don't see the chat, Elena, at the moment. I'm sure everybody will be asking, am I eligible to participate? Am I eligible to be in the pilot phase? We'll come back to that in a few minutes. The idea here, instead of planning, is to say that the kickoff meeting is at least planned to start approximately in mid-October 2025. Now, if we move perhaps more a deep dive as much as we can, of course, in such a big focus session in the what exactly will be the pilot phase, I would say, operational and functional modalities, if you can use the word, you can see it on this slide. I think all very nicely explain the three solutions in the exploratory phase until November 24. Here, what we plan for next year is to use the best elements of the three solutions and facilitate an interoperable interaction. In the past times, people used to call it interface interaction between DLT market platforms and the target services, where the central bank money settlement and finality will take place. This is very important, and perhaps it addresses some of the questions I saw in the chat. So basically, through the API application programming interfaces and the hash-link protocol, DLT operators and platforms will be able to manage the delivery of the digital asset outside the target services or a payment outside the target services, and via the interface to the target services, either have cash settlement in the Eurosystem DLT or via the interface that, or what used to be called trigger solution in the past, have direct central bank cash settlement within the RTGS, the real-time gross settlement system of the target services. Is it the best solution? I would say, given the experience we gathered in the previous year, it's a good one, and it uses it allows us to be agile, and it allows many of you to interact with the Eurosystem. Now we can discuss what enhancements this can take, but perhaps before doing so, a few more details on this slide. I think come in the next one. It's important, I think, to mention to highlight the dual settlement model. Basically, as I said, settlement can take place in the DLT cash outside the target services with pre-funding and with finality later in T2, or directly in a typical, I would say, similar to what happens today in T2, in a similar way, direct settlement within the target services. It's important to highlight that the DVP element, the delivery versus payment element of this arrangement will be established by the so-called hash-link protocol with cryptographic technology. I think we can perhaps deep dive into that in another session, or perhaps in the market contact group. But this is key and very important for the safety and what some people call atomicity of the transaction once we go live. And finally, we should also mention that certain automation will take place also between the trigger solution and the target 2 in order to make sure that there is more efficient compared to the trials and experiments. Now, in the next slide, a very natural, typical question that comes is what will be the framework of this pilot phase? Are we already into the target guideline? Are we into target services? I would say that the pilot phase, being by definition a pilot phase, will have certain limitations. And the idea here, also in order to make it timely and delivered to the market, is not to let's say, redo from scratch the whole framework of the target services, but keep them as they are and have a dedicated, let's say, functional operation and regulatory framework for the pilot phase, similar to what happened in the exploratory phase with trials and experiments. Of course, a typical example here, when we look at the operational framework of the pilot phase and operating for target services, you can imagine we focus a lot into that. There will be a specific terms of reference document, and this stuff that typically we need also to check with the market in due course to explain the operational schedule, specific potentially volumetric limits to the pilot phase, and also what happens if extremely important for us in case of, let's say, emergencies or I would say problems during operation. So all these will be shared to the market, presented and shared with you in due course. Now, a few words in the next slide on the scope of the activities and the use cases. That's also a typical question very, very often comes. I would say it will not be much different to the exploratory phase. We have the typical DVP, delivery versus payment use case. What is here very clear is to explain that the D leg of the transaction delivery will take place outside Pontes or outside the project and the operations of the Eurosystem, and the payment, the cash side, will be part of the Pontes. This is very important, and I think it relates to the question mentioned earlier to Paul, and I'm sure all during the colleagues will explain more the Appia and the long-term deliberations here. We refer here to primary and secondary market operations and transactions, and I recall there was even in the chat a question about that. Why so much focus on primary versus secondary? I would say, as Eurosystem, we're neutral. It's up to you. It's up to the market. It's up to the DLT platforms you are establishing, or you will be established, and whether they are or issuing instruments, national instruments, or for secondary market trading. This is something that you have to decide and let's say influence the use cases. So regarding perhaps the payment side, the pilot solution also covers any payment transactions. Again, that's probably quite important to highlight in Europe for the pilot phase, and in central bank money. Again, for the P side of the transaction, which is within our systems, we come back to that in terms of enhancements, because it's important to highlight here that for the short term, I would say, time to market and the framework, the operational framework that we need to establish very soon, we really focus only on euro transactions in central bank money. Again, the complete list, because of course we can speak about corporate actions, we can speak about, when you speak about securities transactions or financial transactions, the list can be exhaustive, but we will try to be more detailed and structured in forthcoming interactions with you. Now, the next slide, the next two slides, I would say, focus perhaps on one of the key questions of the focus session today, and this is the eligibility. What assets, what participants, what platforms can connect to Pontes? Here on this slide, let's focus a bit on the assets and the participants, market participants, and on the next one, we'll focus a bit more on the DLT operators. So again, not many surprises here when it comes to eligible assets. The typical categories of financial instruments as defined by MiFID will be, let's say, eligible for DVP transactions in Pontes. It's not far away from what we do also with the other target services. And also in terms of eligible market participants, and here probably we speak, just to be very clear, access to central bank money. Basically, again, as I mentioned earlier, we are not preparing any revolution between now and next year. Just to be very precise, the target guideline, it's a public document you can find on the ECB website, explains very clearly who has access to central bank money balances in the Eurosystem through your national central banks, including the recent developments for non-bank access to central bank money. Again, the key message here is that we stick to the target guideline for the time being, and of course the target guideline is subject to updates and amendments as needed and as decided by the Governing Council. I think what is more, and this will not be a surprise to anybody, I assume, what is more interesting perhaps is the next slide, which focuses on the eligibility criteria, but for the platforms. And here, just to be very clear, we have two terms, I think. We speak about market DLT platforms and operators of the DLT platform. And sometimes the words are used a bit interchangeably. Now, the key message here is that at least for the pilot phase, we are not changing the rules of the game. Basically, we follow what was publicly available and decided in the exploratory phase. Basically, central securities depositories under the CSDR, operating SSS or based on the DLT, operators of DLT settlement systems, DSS. We also have to learn the new terminology, or DLT trading settlement system, DTSS, as let's say described and authorized in the pilot, in the DLT pilot regulation of the European Commission. Will also be, of course, eligible for participation. Any other payment systems overseen by the Eurosystem also would be available, could be eligible for participation. CCPs authorized under EMIR. I think there was also a question about that in the chat. Potentially decide to operate a DLT platform. And finally, any credit institution was also not new, not different to what happened in the exploratory phase, authorized under legal frameworks, also national legal frameworks, but also European ones, will be subject, let's say, will be eligible to apply and participate to the pilot phase. Now, this is work in progress, I would say. We will have a lot of certainty, stability that this will remain as such. We still need to bring the overall strategy on eligibility, also for the enhancement beyond the pilot phase, and eventually the long term in the Appia, I would say, activities. So you will hear soon and formally from us on this, also after checking with the ECB decision-making bodies. But this is a good base for managing expectations for planning activities for next year for the pilot phase. Now, if we move to the last slide, I promise, Celine, will not keep people bombard them a lot with slides. This is the last one. No, it's not the last one. This is the last one in the, no, let me, oh, it is the last one. Okay. Perhaps on the enhancements, I mentioned a bit that there are certain limitations when it comes to the Pontes pilot. A typical one is that settlement finality only takes place on the cash side, only takes place within the target services. We mentioned the dual settlement model that has certain limitations in terms of, let's say, multiplicity of operations and crisis management. So what we are exploring at the moment, in parallel to the Pontes pilot phase, the go live of next year, what we are exploring in a bit more medium-term horizon is how we can already enhance what we plan for the pilot phase. And here the idea, and this is still work in progress, I underline that, is that we would like to explore how to integrate what I explained a few minutes ago on the Pontes functionality within the target services. Dimitri mentioned the magic triangle of payments, securities, collateral, retail and wholesale payments, and the usage of a single liquidity cash pool in central bank money. So it's really, I would say, difficult to expect that moving forward with production grade systems, we should not bring the DLT innovative part of the financial market into the single liquidity pool of central bank money. So this is what is behind this enhancement. We also, part of that is we try to look into how the tokenized form and format of central bank money will be part, let's say, of the target services. As you recall in the previous slide, the tokenized cash, it's outside, basically, the central bank finality ecosystem at the moment. So how can we bring it within the target services, within the legal, operational, functional, and regulatory framework of the target services? And of course, when we look at more better integration with the monetary policy and the remuneration policies of the Eurosystem, how we can keep liquidity overnight, for example, something which is not foreseen for the Pontes pilot phase. And the final element, which I mentioned in the previous slides, as part of one can consider limitations of the short term, is the euro-only settlement central bank money. Looking at the potential enhancements, we would like to look into the multi-currency design, of course, focusing obviously as central bank money with the currencies that are currently into target services. You are aware, of course, that beyond the euro, the Danish krona, as of April this year, is part of all target services, and also the Swedish krona is part of TIPS, but is moving also basically into T2 in the coming years. And this is not the end of the journey. You may be aware that in the target services, there is more interest for more currencies in the context of the European neighborhood, of course, to be part of the target services. So an enhancement to the pilot phase will also be an enhancement to a multi-currency format. Okay, I think, Eileen, with this one, more or less I covered what we plan, I would say, in the next 12 to 14 months kind of horizon. Happy to take any questions, Eileen, if you want to
yeah,
I'm
here with you, George.
Later, as you like.
I'm here with you. So it's clear when I look at the chat and the questions we're getting, no one in Europe has gone on holiday. So we're all here. We're all bombarding with questions. There's a number of, so I'll just, let George breathe here for a second. I hope he has some water stacked up with him. There seems to be, so first of all, let's just clarify this. There seems to be a number of questions on the famous call. So call for participants in the market contact group. As George mentioned, this is coming. Hold on, everybody. We will publish this. So you have not missed the link. It is to be published, so do not worry. We will publish it in the coming days. So, as I said in the beginning, stay tuned on our social media platforms. If you follow the LinkedIn group, you will see it there firsthand, and also our newsletter. So it was smart to take a photo of that shot at the beginning. That will come. George, also on the call, there's been a lot of questions on the who, but I think you just talked a little bit about that, who can participate, and then compared to the exploratory work. There's a question here. Basically, do you need to have taken part in the exploratory work in order to take part in the Pontes pilot? Can you maybe say a word on that?
Yeah. No, thank you, Eileen. I was expecting that. I would perhaps go back to the eligibility slide and the platforms, perhaps. That's the key slide, exactly. So I think, it's the... Okay. So basically the slide that explains, and I understand, Eileen, that these slides will be publicly available. The slide that explains which entities authorize.
Yeah, so 2 forward, I think. Yeah, this one.
The next one. It's the next one. So basically, the eligibility criteria, I would say, are quite stable. If you look at this slide, more or less, you have a ticket to apply, if I can say like that. There will not be there will be no pre-requirement that you should have been in the exploratory phase, if this is the question. What I mentioned is that these eligibility criteria do not differ from the exploratory phase. That was my point of the pilot. Now, of course, we are very happy and keen to have a strong interest of market actors, stakeholders to participate. But I think we'll have also a difficult act to make it manageable. A contact group of I would say 60, 70, 80 people in our experience may not be ideal. So we need to manage a little bit the bandwidth, or we may need to have a rotating participation. But we want to engage all of you, obviously. And I would say a final message, perhaps, Eileen, is I would say participate or apply if you plan to participate and if you plan to contribute. If it is about listening and being informed, I think Eileen is your agent. Eileen will organize a focus session.
We will.
And you will be able to have access. So more of that, let's wait for the call of interest. And I think Eileen can say safely, you can always reach out to us bilaterally and ask questions before you apply, during your application, and we can fine-tune the framework.
Exactly. Thank you, George. Because there was also a few questions on the for the pilot phase again. So I think, I think these slides will help people a lot because a lot of questions were coming in before you were showing the slides. So I trust that many of the questions you have already covered with the slides. And remember, everyone, the slides will be published together with the recording. So you will be able to view all this. George, there's a few questions about basically the eligibility, but the rules of the games are pretty much the same for the pilot, Pontes pilot, as for the test and trials, or how does that work?
Exactly. So that's what I said. This slide 35 does not change much from what we have in exploratory phase. I think it's the wording is a little bit more detailed, and we hope it's a little bit clearer. I would say, Eileen, if people take this back as homework and check with the compliance offices and officers, they will know where do they belong in the 5
Excellent.
criteria. Of course, what we mentioned, perhaps, Eileen, to preempt any other questions, moving forward beyond the pilot phase into the enhancements considerations or further project or into the Appia, the Eurosystem will communicate a more, I would say, wider policy, let's say, communication on the eligibility, because things may be fine-tuned as we move forward in the next years. But for the pilot, for next year, we are on stable grounds, I would say.
Super. George, there's also a few questions on the multi-currency design, because of course on your last slide, you're speaking about the longer term potential multi-currency design here. But what about the Pontes pilot? Is that multi-currency or are we talking euro here? That's a question.
Exactly. I think I underline it, but I can reiterate it, of course. So for the pilot phase, so the plan is to go live by Q3 2026. And when we look at the time between now and that go live time, the Eurosystem decided to focus on the euro settlement in target services. So euro only. Now, what happens, let's say, outside the target services? I would leave it to the DLT platforms and operators and use cases. But when we speak about the cash leg, the pilot phase will be euro only. But one of the enhancements we are already looking at beyond the pilot phase is the multi-currency design. And here, Eileen, I underlined just for clarity, managing expectations, we speak about central bank money. So we speak about the currencies connected to the target services. But we can clarify more
exactly as we move on.
In more iterations in the specific.
This is not going to be the only focus sessions we do on this topic, I am sure. But George, just maybe I see we have a time issue, but maybe just can you clarify a little bit about the operating hours on the pilot phase? 24/7, what are we talking here? Overnight balance? Can you clarify a bit?
That's a good question. Indeed, and we know we are very much aware of the 24/7 question. By the way, there is even a survey of the ECB, a public survey at the moment looking into the future, the 24/7 for target services. So again, sorry to repeat myself, between now and next year, we speak about stable operational framework of the target services, and we are based on the cutoff and timelines of T2 and the target services in order to go live with something, in order to all of us as a community in Europe to go live. Beyond that, we speak about enhancements, and there will be enhancements in the Pontes of the future, let's call it like that, and in the target services. So all the scenarios are open, but let's take it in a modular way, step by step. I hope I was clear, Elena.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, George. Okay, so a lot of questions coming in. Guys, you have to bear with us. Okay, we're trying also to keep the timeline. We're also having some questions in for Paul, but I want to bring in my last speaker today as well before we run out of time. So I want to say thank you to George for now and bring in Holger. Holger is our speaker today on the long-term solution, Appia. So Holger, if you want to bring some insights on that one, that can maybe help everybody. Thank you.
Of course, thank you. And we can go straight to the next slide. And that is actually something where I make a reference to what Paul had presented before on our exploratory work, because in the use cases put forward by market participants, I mean, we clearly saw, and it was really demonstrated, that leveraging the full benefit and the full potential of distributed ledger technology, it necessitates extending actually this use of new technology and accompanying procedures beyond the settlement and the related infrastructures. So that's a big point to have in mind, and which motivates actually the Appia track. In addition to market infrastructure and payments considerations, we will also have to look at the impact on central banks' policies. For example, how would then actually monetary policy implementation work? What has to change there? How can it use it? The regulatory framework has to look at, etc. It's also important to address the risk actually of fragmentation in a comprehensive way, and in a very holistic way, and in an integrated solution which covers actually and goes beyond also what Pontes will actually work on. So hence, in addition to the bridge of Pontes, we actually already now want to work on actually the road forward, so Appia, using that terminology of our names, with the objectives actually to have an environment that increases safety and efficiency across the financial ecosystem. We want to facilitate that the market is integrated and that there is actually further competition. And if we manage to set up an efficient and thriving innovative ecosystem for payments and also for securities use cases, we will actually make Europe actually an attractive place for financial investment, and hence, more or less coincidentally, actually will contribute to the international role of the euro when connecting to the rest of the world. So on the next slide, I will go into how could this look like, such an integrated solution of that we would actually propose under Appia, or actually and want to investigate then of how this could be done. So first, I would actually like to refer to the speech by our board member, Piero Cipollone, towards the Digital Capital Markets Union. You have a QR code here on the slide. It's on the speech is on our website. But what it, boils down to is actually what you see here, and we will develop the slide a bit further in this gray box, because this gray box has actually the functions as we have them for payments and also for securities already now. So we know that actually these functions, they will still be needed in the future, no matter who will provide them and how they are exactly offered. So, of course, looking at securities, so there needs to be an issuance function. There need to be notary or CSD services that are being offered. There would need to be custody of securities, trading, clearing. For wholesale transaction, also the central bank money settlement. There are also, if we think of, and you see actually the parties who are around here, So the central banks, issuers, FMIs, asset managers, investors, and commercial banks, some of them will directly want to use these functions, other indirectly, for example, investors, asset managers via banks. So all of these functions will need to be there. Now, how could this setup actually be set up? How could this be set up technically? So where we have actually these functions, also the central bank money, the commercial bank money, very nicely integrated. If you go to the next version of this slide, please. So basically, the distributed ledger technology promise is that all of this could be seamlessly integrated. So if we think of, in the current parlance, if we think of apps, so they would have to be seamlessly integrated with each other. And that is crucial, which is why actually doing something individually like automation, etc., just for one function does not necessarily help the other. So that's the beauty of a DLT, if one can really manage this seamless integration. Now, how could this be done? So we consider actually two main options from a technical point of view. The first one is a single ledger. So this gray box that you see is one ledger. And of course, then it's easy to see that if you have one ledger, one network for this, then actually that once you have established that, it's easy to work on it. You can have automation straight through processing, etc. Sounds easy. Of course, the challenging part of this is to decide exactly what of these functions are in there, how are they being worked out. What is also a challenge is actually to set up the governance for this, because not all the functions will be relevant for different people and different institutions. So the central bank will care a lot about the central bank money, settlement, notary service, custody, etc. will be taken. The private sector will be very interested in how would they offer the services. So there needs to be a shared governance. That's more complex to set this up. It would also be a shared ledger. Intuitively sounds at first sight, at least sounds more complex to also maintain it and keep it relevant and put innovation in there. Hence, we actually also want to investigate another approach. So actually that this gray box still, it should look and, whatever we come up with should look and feel like it is a single ledger, but it could also be that the functions are offered on different interoperable ledgers. Of course, for that one, it's important that it's actually easy, that one can connect this. So those things need to be taken care of. So that might be more easier than the single ledger to actually set up. It might be easier to update this over time because it would be done more locally. The individual ledgers could take care of that themselves. But of course, coordinating this is still complex and making it work. So this is actually something where we have to investigate which of these approaches is actually the better one. How would we do that? We would actually do that with an open mind and in an outcome-driven exploration. So that's why there are also, I've seen actually some of the technical question, what will be the technology for the future? At this moment, no, we don't know. And that needs to be part of the outcome of this, of how to do it once it's there. And of course, there's another thing, just to be sure, this is not just a technical exercise. All of this will also have to be, complemented by business rules, by other agreements, market practices, etc., that need to be agreed. Otherwise, it does not work seamlessly. And that's actually that is also an important question, because no matter how we will actually, whether it will be a single ledger or it will be an interoperable ledger, what we do know is we have to not only maintain, we have to step out our efforts that we are already doing on standardization, harmonization. Because even if you have one ledger, you don't have the same data format, you don't have different business practices, that ledger will not yield the right results. So those parts, also the business side, have to be complemented there. So that's very important. Another question is of how, I mean, is this actually a standalone thing? Is this the one ledger to rule them all, as some put it somewhere, sometimes? No, it cannot be. And that is visible if we go to the next version of the slide. Yes, so it's clear that here, this is actually, while this works very much, I mean, on the domestic side, this gray box works well. I mean, firstly, there's the point that how we are thinking of setting this up is not just for the euro. It is also, we think from the start that this could also be used by EU central banks and central banks that are ready and willing to actually join this initiative. So that is actually something we are looking at from the start. So it's kind of multi-currency available, but it's also that to the rest of the world on the left-hand side, we want to be open because we want to have both. I mean, of course, there are investment abroad, there are incoming investments from abroad, so there need to be connections to the rest of the world. Similarly, also for domestic cases, of course, there can be specialized cases, specialized DLT networks that have their own needs. For example, it could be something on real estate. There could be the travel industry or other corporate things where we don't want to actually offer the services to them to make actually to make sure that we don't overfraud the put too much work on ourselves to accommodate what is needed there for their special needs, but they will want to pay. So there needs to be a link to actually them using, for example, commercial bank money. And maybe there are some automated payments that will involve then also somewhere in the chain actually central bank money settlement. So those connections need to be made. So interoperability to the outside is needed in any case. Okay, we can go to the next slide. How will this be done? So what we will do is, in any case, we will have a continuous involvement of the market in this. So this is not the central bank telling to the market. It's the same approach. It's the same approach as we have done before. So it's a public-private partnership that is necessary for this. Again, because some functions will be very relevant for the central bank directly, others will be more for the private sectors. So continuous market involvement on this, on Appia. We will want to facilitate the discussion actually by actually drafting a launch paper that we expect to publish early next year. So in the first half of next year. And we want to prepare it using actually our engagement with market and public stakeholders. We will align, of course, the Appia initiative with political objectives in Europe, also as mentioned before. And we will also want to run a general workshop to progress the analysis with the market. Now, for the launch paper, I come to that in more detail. So that will be used to explain more about our thinking of Appia, and then really the setup of Appia can start, because we will actually base then our work going forward on the experience we will have gained until that day, and of course also on the feedback actually that we will get on the Appia launch paper. Again, this will be a public-private partnership to work directly with relevant stakeholders to progress Appia under a joint governance. And we will then run also more deep dive workshops with interested stakeholders to progress on specific topics. And they may very well be clustered by themes, etc. So that's what we are thinking of at this moment. Of course, this plan, I mean, here I give you some indication on the launch paper. I mean, how long it takes, sorry, please stay on the slide, please, for a second. So then it will take some time to work out what we will be doing directly. And in the end, I do not know when, so certainly beyond 2027, then what we want to achieve is then later having a blueprint on how the gray box I showed on earlier slides, actually how this could be implemented. So do not expect the launch paper to be this blueprint. This is the start. The blueprint is actually the outcome of further work thereafter. And now we go to actually what can you more expect on the launch paper on the next slide. And there we will want to actually explain the scope of Appia, so the overview of its objectives, the area of focus, and with an emphasis on fostering innovation while ensuring the security of the wholesale financial markets. We will explain more the adopted analysis and the methodology that will be used to guide our analysis. But one thing is clear, much will be evidence-based. So it's not only analytical and desktop research. There will also be actually then for the methodology. I mean, we will actually have then also really evidence-based analysis. And the considerations for the infrastructure and the ecosystem development are also important. So the launch paper will contain actually foundational principles for the infrastructure design, access mechanism, and also the ecosystem and then interoperability. As said, this is needed no matter whether we go for an interoperability approach within this gray box or whether we actually use a single ledger. Then the next steps on the governance framework will also be explained there somewhat more. So more also on the timeline and the joint public-private governance framework. So I cannot answer detailed questions on this yet, just to anticipate this as well. Now on the next slide, what we show here are considerations for the next step. So starting on the upper left corner, going clockwise. So we are thinking of a collaborative actually approach that we want to do. Again, I cannot emphasize enough, it will be a public-private stakeholder engagement. There's also international cooperation. The links are obvious. So we are following also with different degrees of intensity, also international projects, because precisely we need to find ways also for connecting internationally. Also for this one, the harmonization aspect, standardization, also internationally, also for cross-border payments, etc., are very much needed. So this is actually very important. So it's collaborative both inside Europe, but also to the outside. Again, it's not only on technology, it's a full ecosystem approach that is needed. So it's also a holistic approach across the value chain. So it is really looking into business perspectives, policy implications also of DLT. We will have really targeted practical work. So we will, of course, then also together with the market advance on clarifying what questions do we need to answer. That's also where feedback on the launch paper will be important. We will make some design proposals then together for the jointly and test and ideas on how this could look like. And then our idea is, and our plan is to actually test those ideas in order to actually set up a blueprint. And again, this will require also questions like what standards do we need and how do we achieve them? Because again, it's not only a technology work, it is actually really something also involving very much the business. So that's very, very important for this. And hence, this is also what we cover in this question. I mean, with this question of do we include a shared ledger? Will it be an interoperability solution? Again, at this moment, we don't know. It will be evidence-based. What we do know, again, is that policy considerations, standardization, harmonization efforts, they will be very important no matter what the solution is. And on the rest, we are actually very open and very interested to actually have an innovative setup and work central banks with market participants then on this to make actually an improved ecosystem happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Holger. So we are running out of time, unfortunately, because we have about 1 million questions. So we may need to do more sessions after the summer. So stay with us. But I think, Holger, you answered a lot of the questions already about involvement and how people can engage in this one too. But there's also a question on, and I think it tackles a little bit back to where Dimitri started at the beginning with the triangle, the magic triangle. And the question is on this DLT-based assets and whether the ECB will make such assets eligible as collateral, and by when.
Yes.
So I don't know if you can say anything about this already.
Yeah. So basically, this is actually something which is in general necessary for the central bank to actually look into those questions, also to keep up to date. It's not only about settlement and central bank money where we want to offer it in a relevant way. Also, if we think of the collateral framework of the Eurosystem, we have to think about how is that developing, which we do, of course, together with our colleagues from the market operations side on this. Just to be clear, so we are systematically engaging with the market participants in the field of this issuance and settlement and analyze. So it's an ongoing exercise we are doing as part of our work. Actually, we are analyzing of how to make them eligible. So what are the questions? Given that there is inside the eligibility framework that we have for our Eurosystem credit operations. So given that there's a diverse universe of DLT-based securities, we split this work actually in 2 work streams. The first one is actually addressing minor clarifications in our framework for assets which are already in principle meeting or can meet our existing criteria. So this is in particular for those assets that are being issued in eligible CSDs and are available for settlement in T2S. That's the easier work stream to implement. So the second is a bit more complex because for all other type of assets that are not issued in CSDs and are not available for settlement in T2S, there we will actually need to reflect on how we could review and update our framework while respecting the principles of a level playing field and also the adequacy and safety of public funds and efficiency. So that's a more complex one that will take more time. So that will also not always be dependent on us and on the evolution of will also depend on the evolution of the European regulatory framework. And I also would like to point out there, for example, the review of the DLT pilot regime. Settlement Finality Directive, Financial Collateral Directive. So those we will have to follow there as well and may also make use of. So, and in addition, in particular for the second work stream, there are also operational questions which will also arise for these assets on whether and how the Eurosystem can join market DLT platforms, either as a participants and based on what criteria, and also on how to operationally prepare ourselves for this, or finding other ways. Our common Eurosystem collateral management system went live 4 weeks ago. It is, of course, implemented what was agreed on a while ago. So it was not designed to connect directly to DLT platform. It was designed to connect to T2S. So that's something we would also, from a practical point of view, have to work on. So on the first part, the assets which are already fitting to our framework. So that's something we are working on now. I would hope that that actually next year there's a solution found for those points. For others, it may take then a longer time. But again, this is not an official ECB statement. This is just from a kind of expert perspective, my take of what it takes for the timeline.
Thank you, Holger. All right, I think we will need to soon close, but I want to bring back Paul. Paul, are you still with me? Let me find you here. I hope you're still there, because we have a question related to the permissionless DLTs and whether or not they can be considered eligible market DLTs for the Pontes work. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because that's come up a few times just before we round up.
Yeah, thanks, Ellen. And indeed, I saw also lots of questions generally on what type of technical requirements the Eurosystem would have for these DLT platforms. And I want to expand on a point that George raised. So the criteria that you have seen for the Pontes pilot build on those established for the exploratory work. In the exploratory work, we had a breadth of market DLT operators using different types of DLT technologies, public or private. So this is an approach that will continue. The eligibility criteria that you have seen focus on demonstrating that the operators of the service provided on DLT comply with the relevant regulatory and legal frameworks, so not on the types of technology they use. So market stakeholders interested in using specific types of technologies, they should reach out to their national competent authorities and regulators on that point. But there would be no specific requirements for or against a particular type of DLT technology on the Eurosystem side. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Very good. Okay, everybody, I know the questions are continuing to come in, but I remind everybody one more time, everything will be on the website afterwards, so do not fear. You can watch this for your summer holiday reading and viewing. So there's no need to watch movies and read too many books. You can just read everything that you have heard today many more times during your summer break. So with that in mind, I want to bring in Dimitri to close up here on our focus session today. It's been another very active session. Dimitri, you're still with me. I want to bring you in to close up. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm there. It was a wonderful session. Also a very difficult one. When you follow in parallel the questions, it's, I guess, a bit frustrating for the people on the other side because they feel like not all questions could be answered. It's also very frustrating for us because we would want to answer them. So this time I found, speaking for myself, I found it particularly challenging to follow the voice, the speech and the questions, but that's no complaint and no disclaimer. But in terms of attendance, let's focus now on the attendance. We had a good 600 to 700 people. Now we have less, I see, but it's because we went a bit over time. So this is quite a good number still, and shows the value of these sessions. Well, briefly, just to recap, so we started with Paul today and the findings on the exploratory work. Paul explained the setup, so the trials and experiments, also the three solutions used, trigger, hash link, and the full DLT interoperability. He also explained that the market interest was very high. So we had a very high range, number and range of stakeholders, and also a wide number of use cases tested, both on the security side and in the fields of payments. And again, more can be found. There is quite a detailed report available, so you can find a lot in this report that was published not long ago. The conclusion that we reached from the exploratory work is that there is, well, that's no surprise, but there is quite a dynamic ecosystem in Europe, and there is demand. What we also observed is that the absence of central bank money in the ecosystem is impeding growth. DLT also has the potential to address, if not all, many of the shortcomings in today's ecosystem. And that includes the possibility of redesigning processes and practices. So this is a promising venue. We also heard from George on what we intend to do in the short term. The main message here was that we move to implementation now. We are establishing the necessary governance. George mentioned the Pontes working group, so an internal setup which is the same setup as what we have in place for other target services. You also mentioned the very important market contact group, which will be our vehicle to interact with interested market DLTs. George explained the eligibility criteria. I think this is probably one of the key focus points, the eligibility criteria for the market DLTs. I will not repeat everything, but to keep it short, there will be a kind of a continuum from the exploratory work, so the eligibility criteria will be rather large, But again, we will come back to that on different occasions. George also explained that the work will not be finished when we start with the pilots. We will also bring further enhancements to the Pontes setup to overcome some of the limitations inherent to the pilots. And also he mentioned, also very important, that there will be a call for interest. Edin, you reminded it will be issued in the coming days. And when I say in the coming days, it's really probably tomorrow or the day after. We then also heard from Holger on Appia. So the scope of Pontes will need to be widened. This will also be relevant when we need to consider the potential impacts on our policies, but also on potential regulatory frameworks. We will also need to discuss how to overcome the risk of increased fragmentation and the inherent inefficiencies of that. This could be overcome by means of more integration or increased interoperability across ledgers. And I think Holger also mentioned that our first deliverable will be a launch paper early next year to establish the foundational elements of Appia. And now to conclude, well, I will come back to the first words I mentioned. We like it when it's interactive. And I feel today that we were a bit overwhelmed by the high number of questions. So we got all sorts of questions, policy, technical, governance, and many more. And I fear that we may only have answered only a very small fraction of that. So apologies to everyone if your question was not answered. Take this session as an appetizer. I'm sure there will be more. Ellen, you hinted to that already. There will be more sessions in the coming months. We will keep all the questions raised, and that will help us shaping the future sessions that we will organize. So I will close by thanking the presenters, Paul, George, Holger, you did well. Thank you for that. Also a big thank to you, Ellen, and the team that is helping you for these events. Always a great job. And also thank you to everyone who participated to the session today. I hope that you found it useful. And again, this is only the start. We will have many more occasions to exchange. So for now, have a good day, and thank you.
Thank you, Dimitri. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. As Dimitri said, give us your input. You can scan the QR code on the screen now. We take this input with us for future events that we organize. So it is really important for us that you just spend those 2 minutes to give the feedback, and then we will make sure that the sessions we do in the future really fit what you want to hear about. So thanks to everyone for the massive participation. Been a pleasure to be with you all today, and I wish you a lovely afternoon. Thank you so much, and bye-bye.